This is Rocio from SAGNY. Thank you all so very much for joining us, taking a few minutes out of your busy schedule. Today's webinar is part 3 of our product safety awareness program. It's undue influence training, and Ann Lardner-Stone from PPAI is our presenter again today. Ann, thank you so much again for doing this and for showing everyone what we need to do to be safe and up to code. And I'm going to forward everything to you right now.
Great, thank you. Just let me know when I have control so I can open it.
Yep, you are good to go now. You should be on. There you go.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining us for this third in a 4-part series. So, as I'm sure you're all aware at this point, this is part of our product safety awareness program. So PPAI is initiating a new expectation for the industry, really, that in order to do business through PPAI channels, we're requiring all suppliers and distributors who want to exhibit, advertise, or sponsor programs through PPAI to become product safety aware, and that is to get a basic understanding of what their obligations are under federal and state laws. So it's 4 hours of education. The first one is Product Safety 101, which we already did, then Prop 65, which we also already did. This is undue influence training. After this, you'll only need an elective to complete the product safety awareness program. And you may have already taken a product safety aware course that will qualify, and you can reach out to my team, and my contact information will be available on the last slide on the screen. If you want to just check with us and say, am I done or do I need another class? If you are finished at the conclusion of this webinar, once we get all of the attendee lists from Rocio, we'll bounce it off our list and we'll proactively send you an email if indeed you've completed the entire process. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about undue influence training. This is, well, first of all, the good news is that this is the shortest of all the webinars. I think I'm going to be finished with this presentation in about 30 minutes. We decided to make this a required element because it's a requirement under changes made to CPSIA in 2013. That's why we made it part of the program. I always apologize during this session because I feel like as I go through it, I'm kind of insulting your intelligence because so much of it seems obvious, but it is required training. So, like I said, the good news is we'll get through it pretty quickly. I always start with my disclaimer. I'm not an attorney. This isn't legal advice. If you have specific questions as it relates to your business or your products, you have to seek appropriate counsel either with an attorney or with a testing lab. But this should give you a basic understanding of what your compliance obligations are. So, as I said, there were some new changes made to CPSIA in February of 2013. And they were all made as part of the Congressional Federal Register Update 16 CFR 1107. And I'm going to talk about each of them. So basically, these changes were made because the CPSC found that they needed to establish some protocols and standards for ensuring continued testing of children's products. And let me back up just a little bit on this for anyone on the call who perhaps didn't take Product Safety 101 or Prop 65 where I've talked about this. So a 30-second review is 2007, tons of products were recalled, mostly children's products. 2008, Congress acted and passed the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, CPSIA. That made it a requirement that all children's products, children's toys, child care items needed to undergo third-party testing and have a number of other things done as well. So for more information, make sure you listen to the Product Safety Basics presentation. So CPSIA is managed by the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and I refer to them as the CPSC. And they're basically tasked with writing the rules to turn the law into reality. And as part of writing those rules, they periodically make changes and updates to those rules. And that's what happened in February of 2013. what they decided was the CPSC said, you know what, we need better protocols and standards for making sure children's products are tested on a continuing basis. They said we need to talk about what material changes are, because if there's a material change made, it triggers an obligation to retest. Then they said we need safeguards against the exercise of undue influence. And then finally, they'd said we need to establish a program for labeling of consumer products. So that's really what we're here today to talk about, the safeguards against the exercise of undue influence. But I will touch on the other three requirements at the end of the presentation. So first of all, the CPSC says, okay, we need safeguards in place against the exercise of undue influence. Well, what's undue influence? It's basically, it's saying, the CPSC is saying, anyone who's dealing directly with a testing lab needs to undergo training to make sure they don't exercise undue influence. And that would be, say, implying or getting a testing lab to alter their test methods or test results in a way that would undermine the value of that test. So if you interact with a third-party lab, there are things you need to do under the law. You need to have a written policy. You have to have training. You need to make sure everyone on your team knows that the CPSC needs to be notified if there's undue influence. And you have to have assurances to the staff that they won't be penalized for that reporting. So what's the first thing you need to do when it comes to establishing an undue influence program in your company? First thing is you need to develop a written policy statement from company officials saying that any undue influence is completely unacceptable. And the policy, it should satisfy the rule, but it's also to help make sure staff understands that this is really important to the company. You need to make this policy visible and available to customers and the public, and you should consider including the policy in the company code of conduct. And I know you're shaking your head right now saying, I don't have time to write a policy. I don't have an attorney on staff. Again, good news, we have one for you. We worked with an attorney to draft a sample written undue influence policy, and it's on our website under product guides, and it looks just like this. And I would encourage all of you to just go to our website, grab it, copy it, put your own letterhead on it, put your own logo on it, whatever you want to do, call it your own, make it visible and available to customers, the public, and staff. But it's done for you. So it's not a case where you're going to need to recreate the wheel. The second thing you have to do under undue influence training is you have to undergo training. And that means that all employees who interact with test labs must undergo this training. So if you're not the person that works, if you're the product safety aware person for your company, odds are you're also the person who's dealing directly with the labs. If you're not, or if additional people work directly with the labs, it's really important that they undergo this training. So, you know, they may not need all 4 hours if they're dealing with the labs and they get what the requirements are, but they still need to take this training. So you might want to push them towards listening to this, to an archived version of this training. And if you change your undue influence policy, you need to retrain your staff. So these are rules coming from the CPSC. Also, you have to sign a statement attesting to the training attendance. It can be a digital signature, it can be an electronic attestation. Again, the good news is once we get in your transcript that you've taken this course, we'll put it in our database, and that serves as the electronic attestation that you took this training. So we'll maintain that record for you, and we could do a search to see who's taken undue influence training and be able to provide assurances back to you or anyone else if the need arose. So again, that's good news. Training courses. Now, while the CPSC requires undue influence training, they don't have a training course or a specific course. Now, again, good news, this qualifies as a training course. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the basics of undue influence training. And again, I feel like I'm going to be insulting your intelligence to a certain extent because so much of it does seem obvious. But since it's a federal requirement, it makes sense to make sure we include this in our program. So basically, undue influence training. Obviously, testing and certification of children's products, it's important and it's required under law. But it's also important and required under law that you don't apply undue influence onto third-party testing labs to get the results you want. So the CPSC doesn't really give a definition of undue influence, but when you look it up, it's basically pressuring or coercing someone to do something that's really not in their best interest, but they can be bullied or coerced into doing so because you have a position of power over them. You know, it's when one party uses their position to influence the other party to gain some advantage, and it's usually applied through persuasion, not coercion. You're not forcing anyone, you know, physically, but you're persuading them to do something. And if there is undue influence, it could actually undermine the integrity of the testing data, and that could allow defective or non-compliant products to enter the stream of commerce, resulting in, you know, liability, resulting in potential injuries, resulting in just undermining the entire point of the third-party testing. So what do you need to do? Well, first thing is when you're selecting product to send to the lab for third-party testing, you want to make sure that you follow sample selection protocols. Now, there are all sorts of different protocols. Some involve complex algorithms, but basically, the lab will tell you how many products, and the lab should be able to tell you how to select those products, and just follow their directions. You don't want to pick, say, the first 5 products off the line or the last 5 products off the line. You want to get a random assortment, and it can't always be, you know, the first, 5th, 10th, 15th, because that's not random. But you do need to select samples that come from a broader production run. The other thing is you can't test a golden sample. That's a term used a lot in product safety circles. And basically, anyone can build a product to pass the third-party test. But that product actually has to match what's coming off the production line. So you can't build a product that'll pass the test and then, you know, start replacing certain elements with cheaper versions of those elements, because that product is unlikely to pass the test. And we have seen examples of that happening before. So that's like probably the worst thing you can do under undue influence. Also, don't threaten to change test providers because you got a test report you don't like. And avoid developing personal relationships with the lab that could somehow influence the test report. So everyone has an obligation to exercise due care. So every domestic manufacturer, importer of children's product needs to make sure they are proactively doing the right thing and providing good random samples to the lab and not exerting undue influence. But you, if you're importing your product from a foreign manufacturer, it's not your job to train the employees of that manufacturer. So you don't need to be training the workers in the factory in another country. But you do need to be asking the right questions and making sure you're sharing your expectations with them. And by doing so, you would be training your factory in your policy, sending them your undue influence statement, telling them that any, you know, undue influence over a test lab is unacceptable. And the other thing to keep in mind here is that if undue influence is discovered, then the test report itself would be deemed invalid by the CPSC, and then there could be liability to you because you're certifying these test reports for failing to exercise due care in making sure that your labs that your factories are behaving properly. So if you see any examples of undue influence, you need to report it. Whoever you are in the chain, you want to report it up. Ideally, you want to tell, you know, your immediate supervisor or the CEO of the company, but you have to tell someone, you have to tell them immediately, and then they need to tell the CPSC immediately. So for our purposes under undue influence training, any action or statement that undermines the validity of the testing process would be undue influence. And if you have any doubt, you have an obligation to report it. Then you also need to make sure that your employees know that they can report any allegations to the CPSC confidentially. You need to let them know how to make those reports. All of this is included in the written policy. And then reports alleging undue influence need to be filed with the CPSC Office of the Secretary, and then we provide this the address and contact information to do that report. And again, all of this is in the written policies that we've developed to make it a little easier to share the information with your team. So if you find an employee who has exerted undue influence over a test lab, they should be disciplined in accordance with whatever your policy dictates. It could be a written warning, a verbal warning. You could terminate employment. You would need to look at what your employee handbook says as far as disciplinary actions. And then the company needs to take the appropriate action right away, which means basically retesting any product when undue influence was exerted that would undermine the validity of the test report, and you need to retrain employees. And then again, you need to report all undue influence incidents to the CPSC. And that really covers the undue influence training right there. As I said, it doesn't take very long. I'm going to cover the other elements that changed in February of 2013 now, just to make sure you understand what those are as well. So the first one is the CPSC elaborated on what periodic testing is. And basically it says you need to develop a periodic testing plan to make sure compliance continues. And it includes a list of what tests need to be conducted, intervals at which tests are conducted, and the numbers of samples tested. Really all of that you can pull from a testing protocol that your test lab would develop. And we have a ton of them on our website. And so you can go to our website at any time, look under testing protocols, and you'll see the list of exactly based on, let's say it's drinkware, what tests need to be conducted, how many samples are needed. But at minimum, you should plan on testing your products at least once a year. There are some exclusions, some rules that will allow it to be tested at longer intervals, but they really don't apply to our industry. So as a rule of thumb, you want to be testing products annually. Sometimes you need to test more than annually, and that's when a material change happens. So basically, if you're looking at the product and you change something significant about it, say you change the product design, it needs to be retested. Because now all of a sudden, things could break under a different strength test. Things may fall apart, posing a risk of injury. So if you change the design, you need to retest. If you change your process of manufacturing or you change facilities, you need to retest because all of a sudden it's not the same product. If you change your source of component parts, you need to retest. Think back to 2007, Mattel recalled all of those Barbie items and Dora the Explorer. Well, they had to have that recall because they changed the source of a component part, and that was they changed paint vendors. And the new paint had significant levels of lead, and that introduced a contaminant to the process, which resulted in the recall. So if you change your sourcing of component parts, you need to retest. And the new certification testing would be on the new product. Now, one piece of good news with that is not for product design and not for changes in manufacturing facility, because then you would need to retest the entire product. But if you're just changing a component part and everything else remains the same, you can rely on the component part rule that says you just have to test that component part and then attach that test to the broader test on the product. So that will result in some cost savings on the product. In February of 2013, they also talked about record keeping. And record keeping, basically, for every children's product, you need to have a children's product certificate, a CPC. And we have examples of those on our website as well. You need to have a record of third-party certification tests, records of periodic tests, records of descriptions of all material changes you've made, and records of undue influence training procedures. And basically, that would be, this is your record of undergoing the training. So we would maintain that for you. And all of this needs to be kept for 5 years. There's a rule that says you can keep all of this in a language other than English as long as you can provide the translation to the CPSC within 24 hours of a request. I worry about relying on that too strenuously, simply because if the reports and test reports and records are kept in a language other than English, unless you can read that language, you wouldn't be exerting due care on the product because you wouldn't be able to read it. So I recommend that you keep everything in English unless you can read the other language just to protect you. The other thing that I hear a lot from the CPSC as it relates to record keeping is when you make a significant decision or a big change, or you're saying, you know, I'm classifying this product in this category or that category, just create a memo to file. And basically, you want to document your thought process on why you made those significant decisions and add that to the record, because that proves you're exercising due care to the CPSC. So if you should ever be stuck in a recall situation, in the files there would be an explanation of why you thoughtfully made a specific decision, and that could actually benefit you in the long run because it means that you weren't being, you know, sloppy or lazy or inattentive. You were actually being thoughtful. If it's a bad decision or a decision that goes against the law, obviously it's not going to do you any good, but for most major decisions, just write a little memo to file, add it to the record. It can be an electronic record, and it just provides you with an extra level of assurance that you're doing the right thing. And finally, they said, the CPSC in February of 2013 said, you can also start labeling the product as meeting CPSC safety requirements. You don't have to. This one is completely optional. But, you know, if you want to just make sure everyone understands that, you know, this product, it meets all the safety requirements, you can actually print that on the product itself. The label needs to be visible and legible. The product obviously needs to comply with all of the rules in order to make this statement. And you can have, you know, additional labels on it, but you can't in any way imply that the CPSC has tested, approved, or endorsed the product, because the CPSC doesn't do any of those things. But if you've done all the right things and you just want to make that really visible on your website, on the product, you can say that the product meets CPSC safety requirements. And it's a nice thing to add if you think it's going to give you a little bit of a competitive advantage against other products in the market. And that really wraps up the formal part of the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have now, and all of the contact information is there. The website where we have the undue influence written policy. The statement is there to find, the links to the CPSC, and of course, my contact information, as well as Tim Brown, my colleague's contact information, if you should have any questions or you just have a question about your transcript. So with that out of the way, Rocio, do we have any questions?
Yes, we have one question from Joan Westby. Can a distributor rely on the supplier's third-party testing for the product?
A distributor should be able to rely on that third-party testing. So a lot of people say, you know, who's responsible, the supplier or the distributor? And I would say everyone's responsible, because everyone has some sort of responsibility in the supply chain. So the supplier is going to be testing those SKUs that they have deemed to be children's products. They're going to be getting the test reports, and they're going to be creating a children's product certificate based on those test reports that they will make available to the distributor. If, however, the distributor provides the supplier with a logo that's super child-friendly, let's say it's Dora the Explorer, and they are giving that Dora the Explorer to the manufacturer of a double-wall tumbler, the application of Dora the Explorer to the double-wall tumbler can actually transform it from something that would appeal to everyone to a children's product. So in that case, you need to be making sure you're having a conversation with the supplier and say, hey, listen, this is a children's product. Has this been appropriately tested for children's products? Because perhaps not all double-wall tumblers are deemed by the supplier to be children's products and tested, because in their undecorated state, they are not. They're general use items. I hope that makes sense. So basically, if it's a children's product and the supplier has tested it and created a CPC and it has a tracking label on it, the distributor should be able to buy with confidence from the supplier. But there are times in which the supplier request changes that could muddy the waters somewhat.
Thank you. I have, I think, a concern from David Gefford. I think he's tried the links and they're not working currently in Firefox or Explorer.
And
so,
I think he's right, because what we did was we just updated our website and changed some of the navigation. So I'm probably going to need to go back and change a couple of the links here. But if you go to, just use the ppai.org site and then just go into product responsibility, you'll be able to find it all there. If you have any trouble finding it, just send me an email and I'll send you a link directly to the page you need.
Okay, that's great. Any other questions that anyone might have out here? We will be providing this webinar. It's being recorded currently and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, our SAGNY YouTube channel. The other two webinars are also there. Please make note that the fourth and final part of this product safety awareness program is February 19th at 12:30 as well. It is product responsibility, focus on apparel. And I think, and I'm not seeing any other questions coming through.
Okay. Well, if anyone has questions, they're always welcome to send them to me. And I hope this was beneficial to you. And the good news is you're getting 30 minutes of your life back.
Thank you so much, Anne, for joining us again, for making us aware of all these wonderful information and resources that we need. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us. We will meet up here again February 19th for the final and fourth installation of product responsibility, focus on apparel. Again, we'll have this webinar on our YouTube channel. Any other questions, please feel free to contact me as well via email, rocio@sagny.org. And have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye, Anne.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.